Welcome to Layer the Alchemist, where we discuss all things heavy metal and hard rock. On today's episode, let's discuss Styx's 1978 album, Pieces of Eight. This is a pretty cool album cover here. I like the fact that the band's name isn't on the cover, or the album title isn't on the cover, and it opens up here into one big picture, the band on the inside there. So Styx is an interesting band. This is their 8th studio album, and I don't think a lot of people realize how many albums they had out before they broke big and became really popular. And a lot of their earlier albums were a lot more sort of progressive and experimental. They were sort of searching around for themselves a little bit early on, but the albums leading up to this and Grand Illusion, the album that came out right before this, albums like Man of Miracles, Equinox, Crystal Ball, they were pretty progressive, and the subject matter, there was some fantasy like subject matter themes on some of those some songs from those albums. But for me, it's really with the Grand Illusion, the album that came out before this, and this album, Pieces of Eight, where Styx really, for me, finds that sweet spot. And that spot for me is the really catchy melodic songs, but with enough interesting instrumentations and arrangements and rhythmic things going on to still make it interesting and progressive. Now, when we say progressive rock, that can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And for me, Styx sort of sits more, I always compare them a little bit to Kansas, although I would say Kansas is much more chopsy and progressive than Styx is. You know, stuff like Magnum Opus and Left Overture. There's a lot more going on in those songs than there is at this point for Styx. But again, there's those elements, slightly experimental elements, the vocal harmonies, the arrangements of the songs. So for me, I guess I compare them to Kansas because Kansas had a lot of really catchy songs. Kansas had sort of a similar vocal style, the high, clean vocals. And Styx, for me, they're not as heavy as 70s era Rush. They're nowhere near as experimental as like King Crimson. They're not as technical as like Yes. But, they've sort of carved out their own niche. And for me, Grand Illusion in this album, they just find that really nice spot. I'm a sucker for melodic, catchy songs, but I also like things that are interesting, good playing and interesting arrangements. And in my opinion, you get that here and also on Grand Illusion. So those two albums for me is where they really sort of hone in on their sound. The album is produced by the band, and it sounds great. For me, this is a classic example of a really well-produced 70s hard rock, progressive rock, whatever you want to call it, album. The guitars sound great. You can hear all the instruments. The bass is there, the drums. One thing with Styx that really stands out for me is their vocals. Everybody sings in the band. You've got basically 3 lead vocalists. You've got Dennis DeYoung, who has this great operatic, almost Broadway-like voice. I don't know why I always think of like Broadway singers when I hear Dennis DeYoung. I think too his songwriting reminds me of that too, and he would especially go there and the albums following this. But so Dennis DeYoung has this high, really great voice. Tommy Shaw has an amazing voice too, a little more rock and roll maybe in his voice, but he's got a super clean, tons of range on his voice. James Young, he's got a cool kind of rock and roll voice. You also have the Panozzo brothers, Chuck and John, bass and drums. So all great players, great vocals, almost Queen-like vocals. And I'm going to go out on a limb here and just say that live, Styx pulls off their background vocals better than Queen did. I mean, this is maybe a topic for another video, but I was always a little disappointed in Queen and their vocals live. I mean, Freddie Mercury always sounded great, but I thought that they were never able to really pull off those studio vocals live. that's a topic for another video. But Styx does a great job. I went back and watched some live clips, and they just sound fantastic live. So another trademark for me of Styx at this point, Grand Illusion and Pieces of Eight, and on this album especially, is, man, these big, majestic, grand choruses like Lords of the Ring. Oh, hail to the Lords of the Ring. Just when the choruses kick in some of these songs, just all these background vocals kick in. And to me, it sounds very regal and majestic and just like uplifting. The title track, Pieces of Eight, does that like to the 10th degree. It's like the verse sort of drops down, and it's in, this kind of like moving around chord progression, and then it just crescendos and builds to this big dramatic chorus with all these vocals on it. I'm Okay is another one that's really like that. Big chorus. And then of course you have the Tommy Shaw songs, which to me Tommy brings sort of the harder rock element to the sound. Blue Collar Man and Renegade. These are the two songs from this album that get played the most on classic rock radio. You still hear these songs all the time. Tommy sounds amazing on them. Good, like, guitar driven riff numbers. I love Renegade, the opening vocal there with all the harmonies, again showing off what amazing singers they were. Maybe not unlike like the Eagles. This is a much more like harder progressive Eagles, if you will. They've had that same kind of vocal thing where the Eagles could just sing 4-part harmonies live and it just sounded incredible. Styx, does the same thing, and they use it to great effect where these vocals, the choruses kick in these songs and they just sort of lift up and explode. And again, the fantastic production of this record, again, a classic, awesome 70s rock, late 70s rock production. So clean, so punchy, so dynamic. I've been listening to the vinyl. I was also listening on Spotify. I have no idea if that's a remastered version, but that sounded fantastic too. So you can't go wrong with the CD or with the vinyl. But it's just a really clear, everything in its place, everything. The keyboards are mixed in really nicely. There's all these, they change up the keyboard sounds here and there. Like there's in I'm Okay, where there's like a big like church organ type sound thing. And just every song is super catchy. Great White Hope, James Young sings the lead vocal on that one. Lords of the Ring, James Young sings the lead vocal on that. Great White Hope is this great sort of like fun. It sounds like it's like done like it's live, and just this sort of overture introduction to the album, if you will. Sing for the Day is a great sort of, it makes me think of like a Renaissance, medieval, very sort of bouncy and strumming guitar chords, and again, uplifting. There's some instrumentals on the record. The Message, which is sort of a short little sound effecty interlude instrumental, and then the album ends with Aku Aku, which is sort of this dreamy, sort of floating instrumental thing. There's a lot of great guitar work on the album, so it's just a really fun album, and it really represents for me that whole late 70s, very well produced, bands doing interesting things with the arrangements and with the playing, with the vocals, but it's still very catchy. Like it's not just some shred fest where just really long keyboard solos and guitar solos and stuff like that. It's like the cleverness and the progressiveness is more in the arrangements and the vocals and the song craftsmanship. So it's just a really great album, and it's a fun album. I hadn't listened to this album in a while, and when I busted it out the last couple days, I've been listening to it and just really digging it. Unfortunately, Styx would go on, and the next record, Cornerstone, isn't quite as, I didn't like it quite as much. It's a little bit of a step down. And then with Paradise Theater, and then Kilroy was here. I almost said Mr. Roboto because that's the song that everybody knows from that record. And then it just sort of went off the rails. I think it got way too much. They sort of left that harder rock progressive element of their sound, and it got more into almost like a Broadway theatrical type sound, and it was just too much. So unfortunately, like if you're out there and you only know Styx from like Mr. Roboto, please, if you're a rocker, go back and check out this album and go back and check out some of their earlier albums too. They're one of these bands that, the early part of their catalog, they really sort of shifted. By the time they got to Mr. Roboto, they were a much different band than what they were in the 70s. So great album, great 70s hard rock, progressive rock album. So let me know in the comments down below, what do you think of Styx, Pieces of Eight? Are they a progressive rock band for you? I mean, I would say that they are. They're right at that edge, though, of just being like a hard rock, radio hard rock band. But there's enough things going on there for me. Like, it usually happens underneath the guitar solos and the little interludes between the verses and the choruses and stuff, where the more tricky stuff goes on, the accents and the different rhythmic things that they do. And that's, for me, what sort of puts them in the progressive category. But let me know what you think in the comments down below. Make sure you hit like and subscribe. And until we see you again, make sure you rock hard, ride free.